Welcome, welcome. We are talking today about two ways that Irenaeus' writing has been misapplied, has been misunderstood. There are two areas that we as Christians would say are heresy, but that the Roman Catholic Church supports. And the Roman Catholic Church supports both of these errors based on, in part, Irenaeus' writings. Okay? So we are going to be talking about how the Catholic Church has gotten it wrong with regard to Irenaeus and what he meant to say and what the Catholics believe. So the title of the essay, the title of this changed a little bit. In your syllabus it says the perpetual virginity of Mary, but then we're going to be talking about more than that. We're going to be talking about as well the Roman pontiff and the concept of him being Christ's vicar and things of that nature. So I'm titling this Correcting One Heresy and Sowing Others, the Misunderstanding of Irenaeus. So two areas where people got him wrong. I'm going to start with some quotes here. So obviously you're not writing this down. Just read the quotes here. It says, "For it is unlawful to assert that they preached before they possessed perfect knowledge." This is apostles. "As some do even venture to say, boasting themselves as improvers of the apostles. For after our Lord rose from the dead, the apostles were invested with power from on high when the Holy Spirit came down upon them, were filled from all his gifts and had perfect knowledge. They departed to the ends of the earth, preaching the good tidings of good news, of the good things sent from God to us, and proclaiming the peace of heaven to men, who indeed do all equally and individually possess the gospel of God." This is the part where it's critical. It says, "Matthew also issued a written gospel in the Hebrews in their dialect, while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome and laying the foundation of the church. After their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, did also hand down to us in writing what had been preached by Peter, Luke also the companion of Paul, etc." So, but what this phrase here, that Peter and Paul preached at Rome and laid the foundations of the church, read that with Catholic eyes, with modern Roman Catholic eyes, and tell me what they would like to say Irenaeus is teaching about Rome. Yeah.
What the Catholics are teaching about.
Right, well, what more contemporary Catholics reading Irenaeus, why are they really happy about that phrase?
Oh, because it's saying that the foundations of the church and Rome are at the same place.
Right.
Because they're in the same sentence.
Right. They would say, see, Irenaeus believes that the foundation of the church is not in Jerusalem. And the foundation of the church is not in Bethlehem. The foundation of the church is in Rome. That Rome is the foundation of the church, right? And so you could also say Irenaeus meant to say that Peter and Paul's preaching and teaching and writing was the foundation of the church. They happened to be doing that in Rome. Or you could say, no, it's Rome that is the foundation of the church, right? So there's one place where they like to say.
So do the Catholics misinterpret it, or is that actually what Irenaeus meant?
Well, we're gonna look at a couple of quotes here and then talk about what he meant. Here's another one. "The blessed apostles, then having founded and built up the church, committed it to the hands of Linus, the office of committed into the hands of Linus the office of the episcopate or the bishop. Of this Linus, Paul makes mention in the epistles to Timothy. To him succeeded Anacletus, and after him, the third place from the apostles, Clement was awarded the bishopric. To this Clement there succeeded Evarastus, Alexander followed Varistus, then sixth from the apostles, Sixtus was appointed. After him, Telphorus, who gloriously was martyred, then Hyginus, after him Pius, then after him Anicetus. Sower having succeeded Anicetus, Euclidius does now, in the 12th place from the apostles, hold the inheritance of the episcopate. In this order and by this succession, the ecclesiastical tradition from the apostles and the preaching of the truth have come down to us. And this is most abundant proof that there is one and the same vivifying faith, which has been preserved in the church from the apostles until now, and handed down in truth. This list of names, it says the episcopate, because they did not yet, at the time of Irenaeus, use the word patriarch or father. But episcopate is the word for bishop, right? And this is not just any bishop. These are the bishops of Rome. That Linus was the first bishop of Rome after Paul's martyrdom. And then on it goes. And he lists all the bishops of Rome, and he says, after listing the bishops of Rome, that we have a unified church having been handed down to us from the apostles. If you stopped reading there, what do you think this means? What is he saying? What, yeah.
Not the truth of God, or the truth, basically the truth of God came strictly down from the apostles. And since they're the successors of the apostles, right, and that's the Catholic way, the Catholic way is the true way. Like the only true way, basically. Right. Because any other way could have been distorted.
Right. And it's not just any bishop, right? He went through all the time to list all 12 bishops of Rome from the time of Peter, or from the time of Paul to his day. So if you stopped reading there, you would think, oh, see, it's the Bishop of Rome that holds the apostolic authority. But he doesn't stop there. The very, did I get this out of order? There you go, the very next paragraph says, but Polycarp also was not only instructed by the apostles and conversed with many who had seen Christ, but was also by apostles in Asia appointed bishop of the church in Smyrna, whom I also saw in my early youth. For he had tarried on earth a very long time, and when a very old man, gloriously and most nobly suffering martyrdom, departed this life, having always taught the things which he had learned from the apostles, and which the church had handed down, and which alone are true. To these things the Asiatic churches testify, as do also those men who have succeeded Polycarp down to the present time, a man who was of much greater weight and more steadfast witness of the truth than Valentius and Marcion and the rest of the heretics. He it was who, coming to Rome at the time of Anicetus, caused many to turn away from the aforesaid heresies of the Church of God, proclaiming that he had received this one and sole truth from the apostles, that namely, which was handed down by the church. This paragraph follows immediately the paragraph we just read. The paragraph we just read earlier might make you think all by itself that the apostles of Rome are the bishops of Rome are the ones who hold in their possession the apostolic authority. But the very next paragraph says, yeah, but Polycarp knew the apostles too. And Polycarp actually went to Rome and fixed a heresy in Rome. So as long as you keep reading, it's clear here that he's not saying that it's only the Bishop of Rome that holds apostolic authority, right? That he is saying that apostolic authority is present in the bishops, plural. That the bishopric, the office of the bishop, especially the ones like Polycarp, who have been appointed by apostles to be bishops of the church, they hold the authority and they hold the unifying church. And one bishop can correct another bishop, right? As a matter of fact, it was Irenaeus himself who just 3 years before he wrote this book had to journey to Rome and tell the then Bishop of Rome, who is he? Eutychus, I think was his name, had to tell him that he had a problem in his theology. So you got to keep reading this in context. The Roman Church will quote that one paragraph and say, "See, it's the bishops of Rome," except the very next paragraph says the same thing about a bishop from Smyrna. So Irenaeus is very much in favor of the power of a bishop, but not necessarily the Bishop of Rome. All right, now here's the big one. Here's the one that the Roman Church will publish and say, see, Irenaeus believed in the Pope. Here's the big statement. He says, since, however, it would be very tedious in such a volume as this to reckon up the succession of all the churches, we do put to confusion all those who, in whatever manner, whether by an evil self-pleasing or vainglory or blindness and perverse opinion, assemble in unauthorized meetings, We do this, I say, by indicating that tradition derived from the apostles of the very great and very ancient and universally known church, founded and organized at Rome by the two most glorious of apostles, Peter and Paul, as also by pointing out the faith preached to men, which comes down to our time by means of the succession of the bishops. Now here's the sentence. For it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church on account of its preeminent authority. That is, the faithful everywhere, inasmuch as the apostolic tradition has been preserved continuously by these faithful men who exist everywhere. The Roman Church quotes this and says, Irenaeus teaches that every church in the world has to align themselves with the church in Rome. So there's the church in Rome, and then there's everybody else. And they will say that this statement means that we as members of a church in Honolulu should, according to Irenaeus' statement, have to line ourselves up under the church of Rome. And that the church will be unified as long as we all line up under Rome. And in this translation, that is what that sentence means. The problem is, Irenaeus didn't write in English, right? And the Roman Church usually likes to quote him in Latin, but he didn't write in Latin either. He wrote in Greek. And so we're going to go to the problem here. So all of these paragraphs that I read you, on everything that you have read, is an English translation from a Latin translation of the Greek. So you obviously are not reading the exact same words that Irenaeus wrote. Irenaeus wrote in Greek. We have his Greek manuscripts, but he was translated into Latin because that was the language of Rome. And the Latin translation of Irenaeus was published all over the place. And then the English translation that we have is English off of the Latin, not English off of the Greek. So you have like the grandchild translation. You have English from the Latin, which is translated from Greek. And the English translation is good, but the Latin translation was done by a pro-pontiff Catholic in the 6th century. So by the time the 6th century is around, we had popes. We had full-on, I'm the Pope of all popes, right? We had that going on at the time that this Latin translation was made. So it's in the mind of the translator, while he's writing, that the Pope is the point. And so he goes in his Latin very pro-Pope, but the original Greek doesn't necessarily have as much pro-Pope flavor. So the Catholic Church will say Irenaeus supports the primacy of the Roman pontiff. And Irenaeus supports the importance of Rome, but not necessarily that man in the office of the Bishop of Rome. And we'll see that in a little bit. I'm going to give you another translation of the Greek. I started translating it out of Greek myself, and then I found somebody else who had done that for me, and so I saved myself some time. So this is not my Greek that you're about to see, or my translation. I started it, and then went to somebody else. But here, look at this. So the Greek to the Pontifical Latin to the English, this is what we just read. It is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church, meaning the Roman Church, on account of its preeminent authority. That is, the faithful everywhere, inasmuch as the apostolic tradition has been preserved continuously by those faithful men who exist everywhere. So he's saying faithful Christians should all line up under the most important church, which is the Roman one. That's what we have read and what the Roman Church publishes. If you go to a simple English out of the Greek and forget the Latin as the step in between, you get this. On account of the chief magistry of the empire, it's assumed, because at the time that Irenaeus is writing this, Rome is the capital of the empire. So the importance, the preeminence is not because of Peter and Paul, the preeminence is because it's the capital of the empire. On account of the chief magistry of the empire, the faithful from all parts, representing every church, are obliged to resort to Rome and there to come together, so that it's the distinction of this church that in it the tradition of the apostles is preserved by Christians gathered together out of all the churches. This is saying everybody line up under Rome. This is saying everybody come together at Rome so we can figure this out. It's a big difference. Here, everybody's made to obey Rome. Here, Rome is the meeting place, and we need to get together and figure these things out. Okay, big difference, huge difference. So the sense of the text here is that Rome's the most important church because it's the capital of the empire, and so because of that, it's a convenient place for us to all gather and talk about what is the doctrine. And so the faithful from everywhere should come here to meet. So if this is more what Irenaeus had in mind, then he's not supporting the Bishop of Rome as the head of all Christians. He is supporting the concept of Rome as the meeting place of all Christians, where dialogue should happen. Right? There are undoubtedly some pro-Roman statements in Irenaeus. Okay, he does talk about the succession of apostolic bishops, and he specifically lists every bishop of Rome. So he does make a case for that. You can't get around that. And he does say that we should all go to Rome to confer and agree on what we talk about. But the rest of it is translational bias. The rest of it is the Roman Church creating the Pope, and then after that, creating the Latin translation of Irenaeus to support the concept of the Pope. And then everybody says that that's what Irenaeus actually believed, right? We have to also balance the pro-Pope statements with the fact that he values other bishops like Polycarp. And he mentions a couple of other bishops in the course of the book too, that says these bishops are important people who are going to, help drive good doctrine. He mentions the bishop over Paris because it's his neighbor. He mentions the bishop in Jerusalem. He mentions several bishops as being important people who guarantee doctrine. And so we can't just lift the discussion of the Roman bishop out of context and say it's only about the Pope. And then, of course, we have to remember that Irenaeus himself went to Rome and rebuked the Roman bishop regarding heresy in AD 177. And he wrote this book in 180. So only 3 years before he wrote this, he was in the Roman bishop's office telling him you're wrong. Well, if Irenaeus believed that the Roman bishop was the only heir of apostolic authority, he would not have gone 3 years earlier to that guy's office and said, you're a heretic. And so we have to keep it contextually and in place too with history and with what happened. So if you are ever engaged in a conversation with a Roman Catholic and they're talking about the primacy of the Pope and the fact that the Pope is the heir of the apostolic authority, and if they ever say, and as early as Irenaeus, people believed that the Pope was the heir of the apostolic authority, then you could say, actually no, because 3 years before that statement you're about to quote to me, Irenaeus was in the Pope's office telling him he was a heretic. He wouldn't have done that if he thought that the Pope was Christ on earth, was the heir of the apostolic authority. Okay, so that's the first one. The second error, the second misunderstanding that is often attributed to Irenaeus is the perpetual virginity of Mary. The Roman Church believes, the Catholic Church believes, that Mary was a virgin when she conceived Christ, which we also agree with. Yes, that's true. And that she was a virgin when Christ was born. Yes, we believe that that's true. Matthew explicitly says that Joseph kept Mary as a virgin until Jesus was born. But the Roman Church then continues to say that Mary remained a virgin after the birth and died a virgin. And then later on, they said, actually, she didn't die. She was taken up into heaven, like Elijah was. And she was taken up into heaven as a virgin. She never had sexual relations with her husband, Joseph. And then there's a problem with that because a bunch of times in the Gospels, Jesus is told to have had brothers and sisters. And it's hard to have brothers and sisters if your mom is the virgin, right? That's just basic biology. That doesn't work very well. And the Catholic Church will go to Irenaeus and they'll say no, because Irenaeus mentions Mary over 200 times. And every time he mentions her, he calls her the Virgin Mary, or he just simply refers to her as the Virgin, or he will even call her the Blessed Virgin twice. It's the first time that phrase shows up in church literature. Twice in Irenaeus' book, he calls her the Blessed Virgin. And Irenaeus talks about Mary after Jesus is born. When he's in ministry, he will talk about the Virgin Mary as a follower of Christ. And he'll even say the Virgin Mary in the context of Christ's crucifixion, that the Apostle John was given responsibility to care for the Virgin Mary at the cross. And so the Catholic Church will say, well, if Irenaeus says that Mary was a virgin when she's watching Jesus get crucified, then Mary was always a virgin. And so they will use Irenaeus as a foundation for that. Also, Irenaeus talks about James and Jude, who we believe were the half-brothers of Jesus, shared the mother, different father, because Joseph was the father of James and Jude. Irenaeus never uses the phrase the brother of Christ for James and Jude. And so you could say, oh, well, that means that Irenaeus didn't think that James and Jude were the sons of Mary. And that's because Mary's always been a virgin. And so they will say that Irenaeus supports that concept. When you ask the Roman Catholic Church, who are James and Jude, they will say that they are sons of Joseph by a different woman. That Joseph had been married before, had children with the first wife, that wife died, and then Joseph subsequently married Mary and had raised Jesus as his own. But Joseph was significantly older than Mary. That's not supported anywhere in the text. We don't know that there's no history about that anywhere. And the best evidence we have is that Jesus was older than James. James was the head of the church in Jerusalem. And the historians looking at that will say that Jesus was older than James, so it's hard for James to be the son of the previous marriage. Anyway, this is the evidence that they revert to say that Irenaeus supported the perpetual virginity of Mary. He writes about her a bunch. He always calls her the Virgin, and he doesn't call James and Jude the children of Mary. So that's the evidence that they support, that they have. This is the strongest extra-biblical historical writing in support of the virgin birth of Christ. So if we ask ourselves, why did Irenaeus make such a big deal out of the virginity of Mary? He made a big deal out of the virginity of Mary because it was being questioned. And there were, as we said before, there are only 2 places in the Bible in the New Testament where the birth story is reported for Jesus. And both places it makes a big deal that Mary is a virgin. But nobody else outside of those 2 birth stories says that in the New Testament. And so some Christians already at the time of Irenaeus were doubting the historicity of the claim. And so Irenaeus makes a huge deal out of the fact that Mary was a virgin. And it's easy to understand why he might continually refer to her as the Virgin Mary, even after chronologically she's no longer a virgin. Because he's making the point, he's driving the point home that this happened. This was a virgin birth. So even though he's talking about Mary at the foot of the cross, he still says the Virgin Mary because he wants the readers to continuously be reminded that this is the woman who had a baby as a virgin. And so that we would look at that and say, no, he's not saying that she's a virgin standing at the foot of the cross. But this is just to distinguish her from Mary, the other Mary, and from Mary Magdalene, and from all the Marys in Jesus' life, that the Virgin Mary is his mother. And so setting her apart and reminding the reader that this is the case. So he makes a big deal out of it. He also spends a lot of time at 3 different points in the book talking about the parallel between Mary and Eve. 3 different times in the book. You read one of them in this reading, where he spends some time talking about how Eve and Mary are parallels. It happens other places in the book too. And if you think about this, if he makes a big case that Eve and Mary are parallels, he says Eve sinned as a virgin, and Mary produced the Savior as a virgin. So they stand in opposition. But have you ever heard anybody say that Eve remained a virgin for the rest of her life? No. How would you have all of humanity, right? She is the mother of us all. So she is not a virgin. So if you say that Eve and Mary are parallels, then Eve did not remain a virgin. She had children, lots of them. And Mary did not remain a virgin either. Mary had other children too. So the Eve-Mary parallel, major point of the book, and it doesn't bear out that Eve should remain a virgin, right? Because obviously she didn't. So here's just a quote. This is the Eve-Mary parallel from earlier. You didn't read this paragraph. You read something like this later on. It says that the Lord then was manifested coming to his own things and was sustaining them by means of that creation which is supported by himself, and was making a recapitulation of that disobedience which had occurred in connection with the tree through the obedience which was exhibited by himself when he hung upon the tree. So he's connecting here the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the cross as being trees, right? Also of that deception being done away with, by which the Virgin Eve, who was espoused to a man, was unhappily misled. So Eve was a virgin at the time she fell. Irenaeus is putting that forward. The Bible doesn't say that. It's possible. But Eve was espoused to a man. She'd been given to Adam. And she was unhappily misled. Was happily announced through means of the truth spoken by the angel to the Virgin Mary, who was also espoused to a man. So he's saying here, Eve was a virgin espoused to a man, and she was misled. Mary was a virgin espoused to a man, and she was told the truth. Okay? For just as the former was led astray by the word of an angel, right? Mary was lied to by Satan, so that she fled from God when she had transgressed his word, so did the latter, by an angelic communication, receive the glad tidings that she should sustain or give birth to God, being obedient to his word. So one angel comes and tells the Virgin Eve a lie. She runs from the word of God when he says, "Where are you?" And she disobeys. The other, an angel comes, speaks the truth to a Virgin Mary. She runs to the word of God and says, "Yes, let's do this. I am your handmaiden." Right? The former did disobey God. The latter was persuaded to be obedient to God in order that the Virgin Mary might become the patroness of the Virgin Eve. In other words, Virgin Mary fixes the mistake that Virgin Eve made, right? She redeems the Virgin Mother sort of role. And thus, the human race fell into bondage to death by means of a virgin. So is it rescued by a virgin. Virginal disobedience having been balanced in the opposite scale by virginal obedience. For in the same way, the sin of the first created man, Adam, receives amendment by the correction of the first begotten, Jesus. And the coming of the serpent is conquered by the harmlessness of the dove, those bonds being unloosed by which we had been fast bound to death. So here he's building this parallel that Eve is like Mary. Eve screwed up. Mary did not. Jesus is like Adam. Adam, the father of all mankind, fell. Jesus, the first begotten of the Father, conquered sin. So he's building these parallels. But if you follow that parallel, Eve obviously does not remain a virgin, and neither did Mary. And so the parallel that he builds by analogy would say that Mary doesn't need to remain a virgin, even though he continuously refers to her as the Virgin Mary every time he talks about her. Okay? So the Eve-Mary parallel should not mean that Mary was ever a virgin. By ever, I mean like not like that it never happened, but that she continued to be a virgin. That's bad wording. I should say forever a virgin. Make that say forever a virgin. Eve is the mother of all mankind, never claimed to be a virgin after the fall, or before. Irenaeus is making kind of a point of the fact that she was a virgin when she fell. The Bible never says that, but sure, let's give that to him. It's kind of a neat picture. Number two, by setting Eve on par with Mary, Irenaeus assumes that Mary would have had normal marital relationships after Christ as Eve had after the fall. Boy, two typos in that slide. As Eve had after the fall. Fixed my typos. Okay. So the parallel there does not mean that the one had to remain a virgin, because neither of them did. I believe that is the last slide here. Are there any questions? Do these two arguments make sense? Okay, so the Roman Church says that Irenaeus is pro-Pope and Irenaeus is pro-Virgin Mary, pro-perpetually Virgin Mary. And we don't agree with either of those statements, and there are reasons to look at Irenaeus and say, nah, he was definitely pro-Rome, but not necessarily pro-Pope. And he refers to Mary as a virgin after Christ is doing his thing because he wants us to be reminded of that theological truth, not because he thinks that she actually still is.
Wait, so the Catholic Church believes that Eve was a virgin?
Well, that Eve was a virgin when she fell, but they wouldn't say that she remained one, because obviously we're all from her. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, cool. There you go.